She smiles and says that she loves me. Isn't it lovely when the one you're lusting is the one you're loving?
Calls because folk want to talk, so let's go to Dr. Romana. Dr. Romana in California. Hi.
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 Hi. I'm calling to comment on the segment with Cenk. I wanted to say that, I'm going to support Biden because, it's a forced choice. So the first thing I want to say is, but I want to qualify that by saying I'm not happy with having to make these forced choices my entire, adult life. I don't understand why the United States has a two-party system. It seems like a setup from the start. So I wanted to say that. I wanted to say that I believe, although I'm supporting Biden, I'm voting for him. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're listening.
Okay. I believe he is part of the establishment Democratic Party, the Democratic Party establishment. Pelosi, I think, was also part of that. So and Feinstein. And what I mean by that is I don't really see them as that different from the Republican Party when I look at what they're doing behind the scenes. Okay, so they may be throwing us a bone here and there that will, may or may not come to fruition, like student loan forgiveness. But he's voting, he signed off on the Willow Project. So, climate is not being addressed by the United States. We're behind most Western countries, woefully behind. He also has done nothing to reverse Trump's 2017 quote-unquote tax reform, which, the middle class was already suffering, but that pretty much gutted it. And the betrayal, I haven't forgotten about the betrayal of the railroad workers not too long ago. That was appalling. These people were frontline workers. They had 4 days of vacation. They're asking for a few, humanitarian things, and he busted that up.
Okay.
He's also interfering with the present auto strike.
Okay. Listen. One thing I'll push back. There's not much difference between the Democrats and the Republicans because there is a world of difference. I feel like one party doesn't want you to exist, and the other party doesn't want you to read any books. They don't want you to have any rights over your body. They don't want you to be able to do anything that they don't want you to do without their permission. And the other party may have some flaws, but they don't want you to be dead. So I'm going to push back on that. In the current iteration of it, maybe we can go back to before Eisenhower, maybe, I don't know, but the current iteration is a white nationalist party that would prefer there not to be any people of any color in any position of power. They want you here as long as you're cutting their grass, wiping their kids' ass and their parents' asses, and being subservient and stepping off the curb when they walk by. But they don't want you to be in a position of power, which is why they're also suing corporations for having programs to get black people in management, from Best Buy to Target. Everybody's now, we're looking at VC funding going to black women being targeted. This is an assault on all of the things that I think you believe in, Dr. Romano. So let's stop with the hyperbole there. But yes, I agree with you on most of the other things that you said. That said, let me welcome in the guests that are here. Kevin Powell is here, and joining us from across the street. You had to walk a very far away, sir, to get here. You watch him because it's one of the only shows that I can watch. MSNBC's Velshi, Saturdays and Sundays, 10 a.m. to noon. He's He's also a chief correspondent there, the one and only Ali Velshi.
It's amazing to be here in person with you. Thank you.
Yes, get to see how handsome you are. He came in looking like Shaft, y'all.
I dressed up. This is normally an in the office day, but I kicked it up a little today.
He came in, he got on a jacket. I was like, come on, throw us
Another
all
jacket.
buttery. Yeah. I was like, yes, we're in a crisis, I feel, and it's hard for me sitting here every day to navigate this, and I want to shepherd people to goodness and to freedom, and I don't know what to say. Like, I'm confused by the state that we're in. To her point, though, to have to make these binary choices.
I'm with her. And sure, there are people who are senior in the Republican Party who are, there's no question about calling them establishment. They've been in there 20, 30, 40 years. There's also the part that refreshes me is we've got Maxwell Frost, we got Justin Jones, we got Justin Pearson, we got Cori Bush, who slept in her car. There are some people who don't make $1 million who are actually in state houses and in Congress. And by the way, it matters if you're in the state house or you're in your city council or your school board these days, because that's where they're banning the books.
That's right.
So I'm okay with the fact that where I'd be worried, Dr. Romano, is if we were in a situation where there are all these sort of people who've been there for a long time in their establishment and there's nothing in the pipeline. I see a very rich pipeline. I look at Jasmine Crockett for Texas, and I think she could be president easy. Maxwell Frost could be president easy. Those two guys in Tennessee who walked out to protest gun violence in their state.
That's right.
I got no problem with these people being our future. So, yeah, I get where the frustration comes from being a little feeling like this doesn't feel very new to me. Hakeem Jeffries. You don't hear nothing from him. You know why?
Yes.
Because he's working. He's doing the actual work of what a House leader does. He's talking to people. He's making deals. He's out there even talking to Kevin McCarthy saying, I know you got a big problem on your hands because you got 20 people in your chaos caucus who don't want to govern at all. Hakeem Jeffries is in the background helping Kevin McCarthy keep our government actually running. So this is not the stuff you hear about all the time because these people don't all tweet all the time and they're not out there making noise, but they are actually fixing things. And I hope, if you want to give some hope to people, that's our future.
Are you thinking that this is just a phase our country is going through, where we have just been in this incredibly divisive, fear-mongering period, that we're going to get past this?
It's a global problem, right? I was in Ukraine covering this war, and the same thing. These Russians, they get cable TV that's essentially censored. They can get other information if they want, just like Americans can, but people are lazy. And we are not as critical thinkers as we should be. So It's a global problem. We are going to have to collectively decide to be critical thinkers and to approach these things differently. I will say the idea that we're banning books in America, that really worries me, because that's all reading 1619 or Margaret Atwood or any of these people is learning critical thinking. George Johnson, reading someone's experience that is not your experience so you understand what that is. It is discomfort.
Yes,
it's
Ali,
meant to
but
be.
I don't want my child to be tempted by this.
Oh, my God. They're going to become gay.
Agenda.
They're going to become black.
Oh, my God. Ali, my child's going to read this and be intrigued and want to try it.
Everybody's agenda. I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy talking about the climate agenda is a hoax and the gay agenda and the trans agenda. If you are trans in this country, man, you are just trying to live.
Right.
You are trying to get by without somebody insulting you or harming you, and maybe try and get a job and figure out how you're going to fit into that environment. There's no agenda. There's no agenda. The people just want to live like everybody else, just like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights says we all have a right to live. So I think people got to just chill out and say there's a lot of land, there's a lot of food, there's a lot of wealth, there's a lot of stock market, there's a lot of everything for everybody here. Let them live.
Let them live. Let them live.
Love good people. 866-801-8255. I'm going to take one more call, and then I want to get into these CEOs, because I feel like if we could all galvanize around that. I feel like that's a common enemy. John in Pennsylvania, thank you for holding. Welcome to the Karen Hunter Show.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, this is John from Pennsylvania, Karen. How are you?
I said John from Pennsylvania. Welcome to the
Oh,
Karen.
I'm 100 years old, Karen.
No, you're not. Your throat sounds like you might be 58.
Everything is going. But first, I gotta give you my appreciation and your flowers, because you are one bad sister. You are on it. I agree with probably 90% of everything you say, and the other 10% would be just because I'm an old man.
Okay.
But other than
Thank
that, I want to say this. I'm home all the time, basically. I can watch many television shows, news, media outlets, you name it, on top of it as far as I think I can be. And I'm old enough to know that there's been policies, there's been agendas, there's been the system, there's been the go along to get along, there's been some good things that have happened in the country. I told somebody the other day, I love America, but that doesn't mean that America cannot be better. I think there's a couple dynamics that are going on, and your guests have all made some good points, don't get me wrong, but there's also been some things that I think continue to perpetuate the problem that we have. I want to applaud the folks that called in that have gave a little bit of pushback with regards to just starting off with Yank. I see Yank and I watch Yank and I like him as well. But this is what we're hearing out here. And I have worked in higher education and worked with students for 30 years and have seen the evolution and change of the thinking from the first student I had in 1984 to when I retired in 2013. There was a transition that I was watching I was watching every day. I would debate with my family members with regards to what was happening with the typology and the mind and the thinking of not only young people, but young people that are now in their 50s. And they would push back us. I'm not talking about your kids. I'm talking about the kids, the mindset, and the young people and progressive now in the universe. The same way we talk about progressives now. At one time I was a baby boomer, and you look what we've done. So let me just start here. The first thing that I heard when I opened up with the show, we were talking about my man Yank said, well, what about changing the ticket? And then you said, well, who can we put in there? Good point. Who could you put in there? Is that really the issue? I don't think so. Bernie is 100 years old. Biden and all of them are 100 years old. The next thing was the naming of the people to replace them. It finally took somebody to say, well, what's wrong with Kamala? The answer was, well, they don't like Kamala. Well, every day I run around, I'm trying to figure out how people don't like Kamala when there's nothing that they can tell you what they don't like about her, or is it what they don't want to say that they do not like about her? When we talked about, and you mentioned earlier about with regards to the imagery, I like the fact, you remember Yank did that role play and said, well, I can give you 15 minutes how the Democrats could run, and he came across with an emotional, high-intensity presentation with regards to the union, get out there and do da-da-da-da. That's part of the entertainment.
Okay. Smith, did you cut him off? Okay, Smith cut you off. He said you were talking too
That's
long.
correct.
Yes, Smith did.
Good. He should have a show.
Yeah, he should. He sounded very
Yeah.
loquacious.
I like
Yes, he
that.
was garrulous. 866-808-2555.
I like those SAT words.
No, we do this. we evoke dictionary.com from time to time. And,
Yes.
and you were, everything you said, John, was on point. We just
I
have
agree.
a limited amount of time,
Yeah, no,
and
I
we want to
agree
get
with
everybody in. So Kevin Powell is here. Ali Velshi is here. Velshi, your bailiwick, your sweet spot is money.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about the UAW strike, and before that the UPS strike, and before that the Amazon strike.
Yeah.
And I am team people striking
Yeah.
to get more, especially when the CEOs are getting so much, and that their salary is tied to making sure the workers
Yeah.
get less.
Yeah.
That to me seems untenable. Like, we cannot have a system where my salary, I make more money by keeping people without more, without, keeping them in,
But that's
a lesser
the system.
That is the system. So
That's
how
the
do we
system
get here?
we
Because we
have.
weren't always here. We were talking.
So I actually have a theory that we might have always been here. There's a lot of people who talk about how amazing America is. Just years after its independence from Great Britain, it overtook Great Britain in actual GDP. Well, that's because we didn't pay for labor, right? So
Wait,
so,
pause.
Yeah.
Stop right there.
Yeah.
So you're saying America became great by not paying
By not
for
paying
labor?
for labor, right? And so now we carry this on for years and years and years, well after slavery, right? It's years and years while we're still doing essentially the same thing. We're paying people apparently, but then we're taken back for their housing and their coffee and their clothes and all that. So that's because we're well into the 30s now before we have decided that maybe we actually have to start paying actual people for their labor. So we decide that we pay them as little as we can for their labor, and that goes on for several decades. And then we decide, well, we can't pay Americans as little as we can, so we outsource everything that we can outsource to people who we can pay yet less. Chinese, Filipinos, Bangladeshis, Indians, Pakistanis. And that's how the system is built on: do not share the pie with those who help bake the pie. It's You can judge whether that's good or bad, but that's been the way it's been for a really, really long time. And we're now in a continuation of this where it becomes obscene. You see these strikers and you say they're asking for 36, 40% increases. That's ridiculous. I didn't get 3% last year. Talk about what their bosses all got. Talk about what everybody who holds stock in that company all got. And I'm a capitalist. I'm a business guy. I'm pro-business. This is some BS. And it's finally the chickens are coming home to roost, and workers are saying, I need a piece of this. And guess what? Incomes start going up now, right? So we're getting people up to, it's New York City here. You can't hire anybody for less than $15 an hour. Then what happens? Everybody blames incomes for inflation. So now the worker is responsible for inflation, but the CEO, who's been earning 300, 400, 500 times what the average worker is earning, nobody ever said, I wonder if you're contributing to inflation with all that money you earn. So yeah, there's a reckoning. There's a worker movement going on, and it's good.
First of all, thank you. And you did that in less than a minute. Ali Velshi is here. I have a question, because we were talking off mic. Henry Ford is always kind of my beacon of what complicated human being.
Sure.
But he said, I want to pay my workers enough to be able to buy the cars.
Yes.
Right.
Now we fast forward, the CEO of Ford is making $29 million and getting 40% every year, 20% last year. That's not a Henry Ford model.
No.
Because if everybody in companies had the same thought, well, okay, we have this deficit. Let me take half of the millions that I made, maybe not do my corporate jet this year, because that means we can hire 10 more people or keep 10 more people employed.
Or keep them better paid or whatever.
Or give them raises.
Yeah, and some companies compete to be in that best places to work space and fair and equitable between what they pay women and men. But a lot of companies can get away without doing that, because we have a sense in the financial world that a fiduciary responsibility is the responsibility to run your company and make your investments in a way that returns the greatest amount of money to shareholders. Fiduciary responsibility, as a legal term that is held up in court, does not involve responsibility to the climate, does not involve responsibility to the community in which you exist, and does not involve responsibility to your workers beyond the fact that you have to pay them a wage. So until we start thinking more completely, people think of this DEI stuff as weird and squishy. Vivek Ramaswamy says it's to blame for the fires in Maui and all sorts of things. But actually, it's about thinking more completely, right? The new way of thinking about money and business is that I have shareholders, absolutely, got a CEO, got to pay them well. Got to pay my people well, got to keep the environment clean, and got to be good to my community. Most companies don't think about all of those things, and I think they're going to be forced to.
So why don't we do a list? Like I'm thinking, let's be proactive, right?
Yeah.
The top 10, I know there's magazines, but those magazines are also being paid by the same corporations. So I'm like, I can't trust you because you're getting a check. If you're getting a check, how do you hold people accountable? Most people who get checks from people,
it's hard.
Don't hold them accountable. 866-801-8255. But collectively, I remember Dan Price, he was on my radio show. I know he had some other issues, but Dan Price was on because he decided to forego his salary and make sure that everybody got paid a decent wage. $70,000 was the minimum, and then the company went down for a little bit, but then it went back. Like he ended
that's
up
what happens.
Being successful.
The company goes down. Companies make all sorts of decisions. Dick's Sporting Goods says we're not selling guns. Went down. Went back up again because mothers and children going to go shop at these places. They don't want guns everywhere. All these companies Budweiser's getting into trouble for having an endorsement of or by a trans person. This stuff all passes. Ron DeSantis making this fight with Disney. In the end, we are in an under 4% unemployment world, so companies have got to compete for workers. The workers want their companies to do the right thing, even if they're not paying them all the money they want. They want their companies to be on the right side of things. So the company of the future, and I say 5-10 years from now, is a company that's got policies that make sense for the environment, for the communities in which they live, and companies that treat their workers with respect. And you have to just admit, in 2023, workers have a right to organize. You can have your views, and I do, about how some unions behave, including a lot of police unions. There are some teachers unions I can take issue with the things that they do when they don't get rid of bad teachers. But workers have a right to organize. That is a right they should have. That they collectively bargain. How do you fight a major company if you want a raise and you're little you who earns $50,000 a year and they're a $50 billion company? We just have to get past this. You may like unions, you may not like them, but that's just fairness in 2023. Americans are starting to understand this. They're coming back in huge numbers in terms of support for unions and strikes, and we're seeing resolution. That UPS Teamsters thing was pretty amazing.
I've got to jump in here. A question, Velshi, thank you for the economic expert that you are. I traveled this country extensively as a writer, as a speaker. I've been to all 50 states. It's come up several times in conversations with people. Back in 1970, in the 70s, people have said this to me, I was able to buy a house. Mm-hmm. I was able to become part of the middle class. Yep. We were okay. If it was now, I would not be able to buy a house. That's part one of it I want you to respond to. The second part is, as I've traveled this country extensively, this explosion of homelessness. Not everyone is someone who doesn't want to work. Not everyone has mental health issues. People just cannot afford
it.
Can you respond to this?
Yeah, and we have 7% interest rates now.
Yeah.
So if you couldn't afford it then, you aren't affording it now. And normally when you see interest rates go up the way they've gone up in the last couple of years, the net effect is home prices collapse, right? The two are supposed to be, if it's too expensive to borrow, there's less demand. We haven't even seen that. Because rich people don't need the 7% mortgage. They can just keep on buying the house and then buying another house and buying another house. We have an actual housing crisis in this country where we're short of people to work. But people can't come in and work in a place like New York City or San Francisco or anywhere in the Valley or Chicago or Los Angeles because they can't afford it.
Right.
You got people who are, in their 40s and 50s rooming with other people because they can't afford it any other way. Homelessness, housing, and health care and safety are rights. Mm-hmm. We do not guarantee health care as a right in this country. And by the way, if you lose your job and you're sick, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
And we do not guarantee housing. I mean, in theory, we do. In New York State, in theory, everybody has a right to a shelter over their head. But you know what that means? You can sleep in a city shelter. Try that for a night. You lose your sneakers. You lose everything that's not tied to your body. It's unsafe. So we need to think about housing and housing affordability and how we actually build housing stock. This is a philosophical conversation. But to your earlier point, Karen, we're not having philosophical conversations in this world. We're not even having ideological conversations. We're not having policy conversations. We're having a lot of BS conversations about whether or not our government is going to stay open or not. The very basic thing they have to do, they can't seem to get done. So I would love a world in which there are liberals and conservatives and independents and all these kinds of people having these discussions about, Kevin, how do we solve this discussion that you're talking about? We're not there.
Quick follow-up question. So how does this all tie into 2024 for our country? This election we just talked about with our previous guest, one of the most significant elections in our country's history.
I think the problem is right now the fight is for democracy. So at the moment, your choice is binary.
So it's triage.
It's just triage. Republicans have not signed on to the good ship democracy at the moment. It's wild, but they haven't. So your choice is binary.
Right.
It is, do you vote for the people who are in favor of democracy or not? So I have people telling me, as your caller said, the Democrats haven't done enough in climate. It's like it doesn't matter at this moment because you have one group who thinks there shouldn't be democracy and one group who does. So you've got to pick the democracy group. Then you can have a hearty, like Cenk brought up, you can have a hearty discussion within the Democratic Party or the Republicans who wish to participate in democracy about where our policies should be. But that's, sadly, to what your caller said, we are without great choice right now. The choice is democracy or not democracy, and that's not Democrats and Republicans at the moment. It's simply Democrats.
So you're saying even change the language because it's not Democrat. We're not even talking about
we're not.
Ideology.
We're not.
866-801-8255. I am sad though because we need so much as a nation, and there's abundance here. There's abundance. We can all have a roof over our heads.
Yes, we can have an electrical grid that works. We can have things that are immune to climate change and flooding and things like that. We can do all these things, but we're not discussing most of them. And I will say, in defense of this administration, I don't carry their water, but they are doing little things. They've got that CHIPS Act. They've got that Inflation Reduction Act was the biggest climate bill this country's ever seen. No, it's not enough. I'm with all the people who say it's not close to enough. That last administration did nothing on that front. That thing took us back many, many years. So,
not to mention that they ripped up a pandemic plan that could have possibly saved some lives, for real.
I mean, people don't appreciate it now, but in 20 years they'll talk about how Joe Biden put the NATO Humpty Dumpty back on the wall again and held off a major adversary in a war. This never used to be Democrats talking about wars and funding wars. This should be Republican talk. So the world's upside down right now. Your choice when you go into the ballot is I'm voting for democracy or I'm not. End of story.
866-801-8255. Ali Velshi is here. Velshi! You can check him out Saturdays and Sundays. Kevin Powell is here as well. We're going to keep having a conversation if you want to join us. The number again is 866-801-TALK. It's the Karen Hunter Show. We're on Urban View, channel 126. We're talking powers and becomes action.
I had a question for you or somebody in your audience about the CEO pay. Oftentimes it's based on stock prices, and they will oftentimes buy back shares or split shares in order to increase the stock price, and who makes that decision, and how much are they willing to pay to get the stock price up, and even if they spend more money and lose money, does that go into, the profit loss section or some other section that makes it look like there's a profit when there's not? If anybody knows the answer to that question.
Well, Christy in Cincinnati. That was Christy in Cincinnati. She called the show this week. Karen Hunter Show, Urban View, channel 126. We're talking powers and becomes action. And I said, Christy, when Ali Velshi comes in on Thursday, I'm going to ask him that question. Yeah. But I did one better. You're asking him that question. Ali Velshi is here. Question. Kevin Powell is here. Hit it, Ali.
So I will say this: I won't bore everybody with a PhD lecture in stock buyback, because it's a very big question. But yes, Christy got the main points here, and that is a company that has excess money, profits, can do lots of things with it, right? You can give your workers more money, you can build more plants and employ more people, or you can buy your own stock back on the open market. Now, what happens when you buy your own stock back on the open market? You create demand for it. The price then goes up. And for most of these CEOs, so all the CEOs we're talking about that make hundreds of times what the workers make, they will tell you they don't. They will tell you their salary is actually $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million. But if they made $30 million, $28 million of it was in options and stocks, right? So now, maybe the CEO's on the board of the company, maybe they're not, maybe they're the chair of the board, that happens a lot, and they're making a decision to buy company stock back. That is a decision to make the value of the stock go up. In theory, that's very good for the stockholders. That's who the companies seem to operate for. It's also very good for people who get paid in stock. The average worker does not. Some workers get a little bit of stock, but not the way CEOs do. So yes, the connection between buying back stock and increased CEO pay is direct, and it's really important. And there are a lot of companies where the CEO is on the board or the chair of the board who makes that decision. So there's
like
conflicts
Congress.
all
so
over.
It's like
Congress.
Congress.
A lot like Congress. Yes.
So just like Congress.
It's a lot of insider knowledge and a lot of decisions that are made that don't seem fair. And the unions are getting wise to this, saying, you can give me all the recipes about how it is you came up to earn $30 million a year, but we earn $75,000 a year. So we're going to have to make something feel a little more fair.
Yes. And when you talk about this is something we also don't talk about. By doing that, they're also serving their shareholders, right?
Sure, of course, 100%.
So a GM...
There's no shareholder who ever votes against a stock buyback.
That's right.
To make stock go up.
And GM, which I don't own because its dividend is only 9 cents. I ain't playing with no 9-cent dividend when I got to pay $32 per share. Not doing that. That math does not math for me. But for some people who own GM stock, if the stock price goes up, at some point, if it's a dividend aristocrat, they also may raise the dividend at some point.
Yes, and if you're a long-term shareholder or you've got a 401k like most Americans do, it's not that it doesn't affect you. The stock price does go up, but we just have to remember stock wealth is one leg of a stool of wealth in America. Home ownership, as you mentioned, Kevin, another leg of a stool, which is unattainable for a lot of people. But for most Americans, it's the wage. It's the salary or the hourly wage you make. You can't have that lagging behind everything else, because that's actually what most people lean into.
866-801-8255. Speaking of home ownership, there are parts of the country where people cannot get insurance for their homes, which makes it virtually impossible for you to sell or buy in a market like California, by the way. They're becoming essentially uninsurable because of the wildfire. About 35.6 million properties, 1/4 of all U.S. real estate face increasing insurance prices. This is untenable. If your insurance price goes up and you're on a fixed income, or you have a certain budget, that can blow your budget. Taxes are 100%. Another thing that happens. So, it's a lot of things working against average working class people.
And I cover the other side of it because, I do hurricanes, right? So I'm always in these places where hurricanes blow through. I was in Florida for Hurricane Ian. A whole lot of people lose their house. Like, you're in Naples, very nice houses, water comes up, covers the whole entire first story, but they've built these first stories to be flooded, and everybody's got insurance. Then you go up to Fort Myers Beach, nobody's got insurance for anything. Your house is flooded, your shrimp boat's washed away, there's no insurance. Try to get insurance for a flood or for wind in Florida, in Louisiana, fire insurance in California. Here in New York, there are places just north of the city. If your place floods, you're out of luck.
I lived in a flood zone, and I'm going to tell you, the flood insurance
it's a lot of money.
Was ridiculous.
So some people choose not to do that. They can't afford it. Then what happens when the flood comes? Because the flood's going to come. Yeah.
Right.
I got to jump in for a second, because I'm loving this conversation and what you're saying. We vote for democracy 2024. We get the result we think we deserve for the country. What is the economic plan for the country? What would your vision be? We know what Roosevelt did in the 1930s. Yeah. We know what Johnson did in the 1960s. What would we need?
Well, look, here's the good part.
Yeah.
We have very low unemployment in this country, which means we have an opportunity to get people the wages they want. We are going to have to fix immigration in this country, right? We have to be like in Canada, where I come from, where we love immigration because we realized we were a podunk little country until all the immigrants came.
Talk about that. You
Yeah,
talked about that during the break.
So 1968, a guy named Pierre Trudeau, the father of the current prime minister, looks at the map and says, we are not having enough children. We are going to not be able to punch above our weight. So they opened up and they said, we're going to find refugees, my parents were anti-apartheid activists. They called them in. Like they wanted everybody. They said, if you can work, you come in here. So Canada now has become this amazing place. You go to Vancouver, you go to Toronto, these are global cities. They're not global cities when I grew up. Toronto was a podunk little place that shut its streets at 6 o'clock and you and your horse went home. Now it's this global city. So Canada loves immigrants. They look at immigrants and say, you built our country. America thinks immigrants come across the border and steal your shit. This is just a stupid way to think about things. We are short of labor. You can't find enough people to pick your fruit, to deliver your food, to make your stuff, to be your architects, to be your pharmacists. Literally, my pharmacy closes for 2 hours a day, a national chain every day, because they don't have enough pharmacists. So A, number one, fix labor. B, number two, we're the only country in the developed world that does not have universal health care.
Yeah.
Nonsensical. Education costs. Number three, deal with the climate. And five, I skipped, so that's five, whatever I'm on now. Figure out manufacturing, right?
Yes.
The pandemic showed us you cannot just manufacture everything overseas. You got to be able to manufacture
But
stuff.
that
What
only
a great
happened,
opportunity.
That happened because of greed, right? I grew up in an era, we all are the same, just about generation, where it was made in America. There were whole commercials.
Gen X.
You know, it was
We're the
a
last
whole
generation.
commercials about made in America, the tag, you were proud to be. Nothing's made in America,
No,
not even your
no.
drawers are made in America.
No.
And it's crazy that we don't make anything.
And you don't have to make everything.
No, but we should make
But make
something.
some things and be able to make enough stuff that you can, move around when you have a pandemic or something like that. There are some basic things we can do to fix things. We are going to have to deal with the climate. That is a big thing. We're going to have to deal with the fact that most Americans are right when they think voting doesn't really make sense in this country. We make it awful hard for people to vote. And my view is, as a child of people who grew up because of the color of their skin without the right to vote, why can't everybody vote? Why don't we want everybody to vote all the time? There was one Republican out west who said, this is getting crazy. It's gotten to the point that a college kid can roll out of bed and cast their ballot. And I'm thinking, that's amazing. Yeah. Shouldn't we all be able to roll out of bed and cast our ballots? We got to fix some things on a principled level, but we got enough on an infrastructure and a basic level to fix to make this a better country. And we can be back on top. We can be the finest country in the world. We can be a shining city on a hill. But we actually have to focus on that, not the stuff that's going on right now.
All right, 866-801-8255. This is a question for everyone. What would it take to get there? I think the solution, I wrote down your points.
Young people.
Young people?
Young people.
Well, he agrees with Jink that Jink said the same
I'm
thing.
very impressed with these young legislators who I meet.
Yeah.
They're not afraid to break the China, right? There was a woman, a trans woman in Montana. I'm trying to remember. I apologize for not remembering this properly. But they all get kicked out for the same thing, breaking the decorum.
Right.
Because the system is all about the decorum. Don't raise your voice. Don't use that language.
Right.
And these people are saying, there are kids dying in the streets of in our school halls. I'm not so worried about the decorum right now. I'm worried about stopping people from guns from killing our children. Same thing with book banning, right? It's like what I saw a great meme that says, until somebody takes, Romeo and Juliet and kills 8 people with the book.
Right.
Don't worry about books. You got bigger problems in your school, and it's not about books. But you know what? Who bans books? People at the municipal level, people at your school boards, people in your parent-teacher meetings. So citizenship begins on your block,
Right.
in your school, right? You don't have to be president of America to fix this.
What are they afraid of?
Change, everything.
Change. They've been brainwashed in believing that the old America was better. I mean, when you talk about Canada, I think it's important because you have this perspective, and thank your family, because as someone who came into my activism because of the anti-apartheid movement, much respect to your family.
Thank
but
you.
I think the fact, Indian, South Africa, Canada, you're in America, I feel that a lot of us just don't have a broad perspective in our country. I mean, I can imagine how people, you were talking about immigration, for it's sad to me that you were talking about how Canada had this open door policy. Two things I thought about, Karen and Velshi. One, when I was in Ireland, of all places, a couple of years ago, they talked about how they wanted to get to Canada, not America. You know what I mean? We want to get to Canada because it was easier to get into. The second thing is, as you were describing Canada, I kept thinking about all the barbed wires that are down there in this, on the border now, literally putting barbed wires up so people can just cut themselves because we don't want them in the country.
Yeah. It's just not a humane way of looking at
No.
things, right? Migration is going to be the way of the future. We have drought, we've got climate change. People are going to move. If you think this last few years of a few million people showing up on the borders of Hungary and Serbia and America are a big thing, this is nothing compared to what it's going to be. So let's have policies. Let's understand why this works. But we don't. We take an inhumane view of it.
Yeah.
We have such opportunity. And again, I just want to remind you, we are in a world of abundance. I grew up in a world where we talked about famine and we thought we'd run out of oil and run out of water and run out of food. There's no running out of anything anymore. We have enough everything for everybody, including land. We just have to be fair about making sure that everybody gets a piece of it.
The key word you used was the philosophy has to change.
That's right.
It's a humane philosophy.
Well, I'm committed, and I'm
too.
going to invite everyone listening to be committed, and I think everyone in this room is committed to making changing the narrative is what we have to do, because changing a narrative changes the mind. And right now, folk are just really stuck. I don't see it ending well. 866-801-8255, and maybe it has to run into an absolute brick wall, shatter, fall into a million pieces, and then those of us who know how to build can put the thing back together again. But I don't know. I don't see this. 2024 is not. I'm not scared because I have a passport. So I'll just say that, I have a passport and some coin. I can get out. I'm not waiting for the damn ship to go down. I'm not that person. I'm not going to wait to the last. I'm not going to be the last Jewish person in Germany. I'm not waiting because things are going to get better. These things happen and it's cyclical, right? Because you would think Holocaust can't happen again. Oh, Rwanda said, hold my beer. It can always happen, right? So.
Yeah, 100% right about that.
Are you fearful that that Trump is going to win and that's going to usher
I think it's a huge possibility. And I think your 1933 reference is really interesting in Germany, because people forget that Germany in 1933 was one of the most advanced societies we'd ever seen. Right? It was reasonable to say there were Jews who were in government, academia, music, science, like the best minds in the world. Germany really had it all going on. And so people said, this can't get that bad. And then it did. And that's all I want Americans to understand. I'm not saying we're having a Holocaust. I don't want to make that comparison at all. I'm just saying things can get a lot worse than you think they are because you just think everything's under control. What we learned is that our world, our government didn't fall apart in the last few years because there were some people who did the right things. But our structures, I'm not 100% sure whether they held up. So I'm not hoping the next time that there are a few people who did the right things. I would like a system that guarantees that somebody can't come in and take over our government and undo our democracy.
I run my fingers through her hair as she smiles and says that she loves me. Isn't it lovely when the one you're lusting is the one?